Hello, hello, good morning, good morning. I hope that you're having a wonderful day so far. I am coming on to talk estrogen detox, which is, the nerd in me loves this. Hi there. Hi. I'm going to try to pin this. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about estrogen detox today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I know this is a big topic for a lot of people. So while, and good evening, yes, some of you ladies are elsewhere. I also, while everyone's hopping on, I did want to show you that Megan and I were featured in Paleo Magazine. So how your cycle can, I know it's backward for you guys, but how your cycle can empower your life. There is an article in it, so if you guys have access to, or if you go, I know it's in Whole Foods and a couple other chains that are across the country, but if you guys want to go check us out, it is an article that Megan and I wrote for the magazine, and then Megan also has one coming out about mold and your hormones, so keep an eye out for that. We are super grateful to have been included in there. All right, so for estrogen detox, we are going to talk all about kind of the setup for how high estrogen happens. And then we're also going to talk through how estrogen gets processed and out of the body. So if you have not seen it yet, we had a post this morning about estrogen detox, and there are actual snapshots of an old Dutch test of mine. If you have not checked that out, those dials are what I'm going to be talking about today. But we don't need the dials to have this conversation inside the live. So I'm going to go ahead and describe that. All right, so what kicks off the whole creation of estrogen in the body in the first place, right? That's kind of always the first place we start, and it's one of the best first questions to ask, because in anyone who is cycling or has, even if you don't have a period, right, if by cycle I mean the setting up of ovulation, that this is why we think that basal body temperature tracking is such a big deal and such a helpful tool to track in real time what's actually happening with the cycle. But in any case, anyone that's cycling, so premenopausal young women, it's their hypothalamus, their native hypothalamus, which is a part of your brain, sets up the signal that asks the ovaries to make estrogen. And if you were not on a live last week that I did about how cycle problems get set up, go in our feed and check that out. It's an Instagram TV. But that conversation generally fluctuates throughout the month in a very predictable way. So that's why people say the first half of your cycle is really dependent on estrogen, because that conversation between your brain and the ovaries is happening, and that's what's setting up the cycle and the egg and follicular formation. And then the second half of the cycle is all about progesterone, and that's because of how the follicle was set up, then determines how much progesterone you make. If that is not review for you, go and watch that previous video. Otherwise, this is review for you for how the brain tells the ovaries to make estrogen. Now, that signal can be either undershot, it can be right on, or it can be overshot. It's like the Goldilocks of estrogen, right? And many of us are living in a space where our brain is overshooting the amount of estrogen to create. Now, the cause of that can be a number of different things, but these are the more common things you've probably heard about. This is why women are encouraged to stay away from microplastics and any sort of estrogen mimicking compounds in the environment. This is why we talk about furniture off-gassing and supporting detox functions, right? All this stuff is a natural extension of how the body works, and then we are just addressing the causes. right? And so many people, because of what's in our environment, and because of stress, because of the way we eat, because of inflammation, all of that can cause the signal from the brain to the ovaries to overshoot the signal for estrogen creation. We also, that picture can be further muddled because of the direct action of estrogen mimicking compounds in our environment, but that, even though I don't have time to go into it now, is actually still looped into how the brain ultimately makes the decision. So it's kind of double-edged sword there on the environmental toxins, and that's why we talk so much about those. Right? So, and you can hear as I'm talking, this is how we determine what topics we chat with you guys about, right? This is all just feeding into how the body works, and then the things that we can take action on are just a natural extension of the things that impact these systems. Right, so that was kind of step number one, is how is high estrogen even set up if that's something that happens? And the same thing is true for low estrogen when that happens. So the second portion of that is, once we have estrogen and any estrogen mimicking substances, and also anything that competes for estrogen clearance, right, in the liver, all of that then ends up going to the second area that we're going to talk about, which is, once you've made or been exposed to the estrogen, then it's time to work on processing it, getting the molecules processed the right way, and then getting them safely escorted out of the body. So there are multiple steps along the way for estrogen, but what we'll talk about mainly today is phases 1 and 2. And again, in the post on the feed today, you can see the actual dials of how this is seen on the Dutch that we do. But these, this way of your body working is totally true for you, whether you know the dials or not. So you can still get a lot out of this even if you don't have that. Now, with estrogen, and the first step that's supposed to happen, there's 3 forms of estrogen in the body. They're generally, nicknamed E1, E2, E3. E1 and E2 are the more dominant estrogens. The E3 is really only ever around in pregnancy, but it can actually also get elevated when there's really high estrogen, because the body essentially recognizes that this E3 is a less damaging form of estrogen, and it will shuttle things over there. But in general, it's usually E1 and E2 are the ones that get elevated, and then E3 can get looped in. So from there, with the 3 estrogens, they go down, especially we look at E1, the pathways that the body uses to process it in this phase 1 step. So there are 3 options that the estrogen can go down, and the creation of those, the end result of the 3 different pathways will determine much of what we feel in terms of symptoms. So, for example, there's one pathway that's called 4-OHE1. You don't have to remember that. But this particular form of estrogen is tissue proliferative. Sometimes people will say carcinogenic, as in, carcinogenic means it causes cancer. It's a little bit untrue, because what really happens is that 4-OHE1 is tissue proliferative. So all it does is, when cells are replicating, it makes them grow faster. So that is true for if you already have a cluster of cancerous cells, it will also proliferate them faster. but it also proliferates things like fibroids, right? It also proliferates the lining of the uterus, so we have heavier, more clotty, more crampy periods. That's where it proliferates tissue in the breasts. People can get fibrocystic breasts. It proliferates really everything. That's where some women will complain of like very dull looking skin, because the cells are just kind of building up on one another faster than the clearance generally happens, right? So all of that is an offshoot of which pathway estrogen goes down. Now 16-OHE1, you'll see on the picture that I posted, there's another pathway. Again, you don't have to remember these names. I'm just, if you're interested or whatever, that you have something to look up. But if that's not your deal, don't even worry about it. The 16-OHE1 pathway is the one that estrogen form is more what, in the nerdy medical field, we call it vasoactive. So, and that's a form that's been implicated in hot flashes for older women, because it causes like that the problems with the vessels. Let me say it another way so that it's easier to understand. Problems with vessel action. And while that's kind of an extreme example, it also applies to things like Raynaud's, that 16-OHE1, Raynaud's, which is a vasospasm and vascular problems in your fingers and toes, and can be elsewhere. These are things like headaches, right? So cyclical headaches can be seen with 16-OHE1. Now, of course, as women get older, it's more important to have some 16-OHE1 because it's a bone-building estrogen. And so that's where 16-OHE1 I don't really think of as good or bad. It just has to be in balance with what's normal for you, right? But the 4-OH, with the tissue proliferation, not a whole lot of other benefits from that one. And then if you're looking at that picture, there's a green arrow, the 2-OHE1. Now that's our protective estrogen. So the good stuff that we want from estrogen, that's kind of where we want the bulk of our estrogen, the pathway that we want the bulk of our estrogen to go down. All right, so that was all just phase 1 of estrogen detox. Like I said, as we talk through the different forms of estrogen, you can hear where potentially some of your issues that are coming up, maybe you're having the heavy clotty periods, that can be a clue that there's something going on with estrogen detox. Again, as we get to the end, I'm going to talk about kind of whole food ways to support these pathways. There's of course supplements and things that we can do, but they are heavy hitters that require testing and follow-up and things, and so we don't throw those around willy-nilly. All right, so I'll circle back around to what we're going to do for these, but first I'm going to talk about phase 2. And phase 2 of estrogen detox is once you've taken the estrogen down the pathways that are available to them, that gets the estrogens ready to be processed, but they're basically halfway metabolized at this point. If these phase 1 reactants get out into the bloodstream, they tend to cause issues. And the reason that we care about that is because of phase 2. So phase 2 detox is when we take those things that got tagged and partially processed and we kind of finish up the rest of the way. And for phase 2, this is where it's a methylation step. So that's why on the Dutch we get some clues into functional methylation status for estrogen. And you can see in the post today I had phase 1 diagram from my Dutch on the first picture, and on the second one you can see the step that estrogen has to go through and how it tells you whether your methylation of estrogen is high and low. When our methylation is high, a lot of times that's the body trying to get rid of those phase 1 reactants that we made in the first step. So a lot of times that's a protective mechanism. But when it's low, like you can see mine was at this time, that's where not only was I having a problem getting estrogen out, but because I had a backup there, I was recirculating the phase 1 reactants that I had already tried to process. So this is where I could eat a lot of the cruciferous veggies, and I was, but I didn't, and that's what we'll talk about next. But I didn't have that step 2, the phase 2 step down, and therefore the problems were continuing to kind of double in the background. So it's very, very happy to have that information, because these 2 steps need to act in concert with one another. Now, there is another step to estrogen detox, which is phase 3, and that actually happens in the gut. And that's why with this step we talk about how important it is to stay regular and to have daily bowel movements, because this phase 3 estrogen detox is largely dependent on getting the estrogen completely out of the body and not recirculated again to start this process all over, right? So that's where I'm not going to talk a lot about phase 3, but that's where, the importance of going daily, having a daily bowel movement comes into play. All right, so that was a bunch of nerdiness. I'm going to review. Hold on. So we talked about how estrogen actually gets set up to be made, again, from the brain, communication to the ovaries. Then we talked about once it's made, what are we going to do with it? And all those parts, there were 3 steps that we talked about. We talked about phase 1, which is getting estrogen appropriately started to be metabolized. It still causes problems, though, in that form. Then phase 2, which is a methylation step, which gets the partially inactivated hormones over-methylated and into the gut where they can be removed. And then phase 3 is the actual, estrogen detox, removing from the body. So, clearly many women have issues in this area. So what steps can we take into account all these steps along the way, right? So we're going to start from the very top again. We're going to talk through ways that we can support ourselves. Now, just like I said earlier, I'm going to talk through whole food, lifestyle, and tea forms of support that we can do for our body. There are at every single step, of course, hard-hitting and powerful herbs and supplements that we can use. However, in our opinion, because these things are powerful and because they work, we respect them by having monitoring along the way as we're using them. We don't believe in kind of using things willy-nilly, because really, in our opinion, it does not show enough respect for how powerful these things are for us to think that we can just take them and expect them to not cause problems. So because of that, we're going to go all whole food and teas and ways that we can support our body, okay? So I hope you understand how, when you read things on the internet that are kind of throwing things out there, please understand that there is a great deal of service these things provide for us, but we also need to have that respect for them to monitor what they can do to our bodies. So please be safe when you're looking at anything on the internet, okay? So from the top, we talked about the hypothalamus communicates to the ovaries. Now, to support the hypothalamus, the number one thing we can do is to actually help ourselves have decreased perceived stress in terms of how we view our life. Now, when I say that, there's lots that goes into this, but it's not about what you're doing, it's how you're doing it when you're doing it. I know that's a little meta, but really, we can be really good at eating the veggies, going to sleep early, and going to yoga. But if you are like, oh my God, I'm late to yoga, oh my gosh, I haven't eaten enough veggies and I need to get to sleep, but I didn't sleep last night, and now, that sort of communication with yourself is what your body hears. So it's not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it and the approach you have while you're doing it. So please be kind compassionate and gentle with yourself more than anything else, because that's what your hypothalamus hears. That's the signal it's going to send to the ovaries. And I know that a lot of people want to gloss over this part, right? And they're like, just tell me what foods to eat. But really, we're talking about, after seeing, over 1,000 tests that were in real living women, this is the big stuff that actually matters. You can't out supplement your own brain. However, we can support inflammation in terms of what the brain sees. And this is where Megan and I talk about supporting inflammation in the first half of the cycle. So in terms of what your hypothalamus signals to your ovaries to create in terms of estrogen, we can tone that signal to make it more happy by incorporating things like holy basil tea, right? So Tulsi tea is something I tend to drink every evening in some sort of combination with things like chamomile, lavender, valerian root. All these things are phenomenal. And then things like lion's mane mushrooms. Like, I get my 4 sigmatic blends and I incorporate those. Usually I do it as an afternoon pick-me-up because they're delicious, and I can make it like creamy with my heavy whipping cream and things like that. But super easy ways to incorporate, like drinking something in your day but still supporting this really important system. This is also where, when we talk about mineral density and nutrient density, we need things like, or we can use things like nettle tea, which is really mineral dense, to help our hypothalamus set up estrogen creation appropriately. So that is that entire system. So then let's move to the liver. So that's where phase 1 and phase 2 estrogen are happening. And again, if you're just hopping on, go back to the beginning after I'm done, because I talk through kind of start to finish everything that happened. But phase 1 and 2 are happening in the liver. And those are 2 discrete ways that we can support our, there are ways to support those pathways. So when it comes to phase 1, this is where cruciferous veggies really shine, and that's why Megan and I highlight them so much and we talk about them so often, because phase 1 for getting the estrogens down that protective 2OH pathway, cruciferous veggies really encourage that pathway activity and then decrease the chances of it ending up as 4OH and 16OH, which, like we talked about in the beginning, those are the forms that cause the bulk of the problems, right? So cruciferous veggies, like adding leafy green veggies, these are your cauliflower, sorry, can't talk, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, broccoli sprouts, really sprouts of any kind. Those are phenomenal. And we've had women who, even though they're working with us, potentially wanting to stay away from supplements like DIM and I3C and sulforaphane, depending on what they need. And they're like, I actually would love to do it with food. And, our response is always like, great, we love doing things with food and teas whenever possible, so we'll accommodate that, right? And so we've seen in real time before and afters on the Dutch with cruciferous veggies added in, and there are powerful shifts that you can make with food for phase 1, and it's amazing how well it works. But it has to be, a consistent effort on someone's part. It has to be, at a level that actually helps detox estrogen through the appropriate phases. But food can be really, really helpful for that. Green juices also help with that. And of course, like I said, there's many different supplements that you can go in and sniper certain pathways if you know what they are. But in our opinion, that can only safely be done if you're actually monitoring and you know the calls to make for that, right? So again, I can't say this strongly enough. There's a bunch of information on the internet that you can find. However, it's always very important to be safe because those are heavy hitting things. All right, so phase 2. That's again a step in the liver, but it's discrete from the step that we have. So when it comes to phase 2 with methylation support, this is where, again, mineral density really plays a role, because there's a lot of cofactors that support the reactions around this particular reaction. And also, again, leafy green vegetables do have some crossover here. What aren't they good for, it seems, right? There's just so many steps. And then adequate magnesium intake, also incredibly important. Magnesium intake, can come from foods, of course, but I also really like topical forms that are available. This is your magnesium oil, this is magnesium salt, Epsom salts added to your bath, and then also magnesium glycinate forms that are available. And then the other thing that can be really helpful for phase 2 is sources of zinc. So zinc sources, if you can have it, I really like shellfish for that. Shellfood, is that even a word? Guys, it's early for me. I'm on Pacific time. But the shellfish can be an amazing source of zinc, but any source of zinc can be really helpful for this phase 2 step. And then for the last step, which does not happen in the liver, this is happening in the gut. This is phase 3 estrogen detox. This is where fiber, yeah, I love it. Thanks for bearing with my brain fires. This is where adding fiber, this is where we like adding seeds and things like that to our diet to help the gut escort these estrogen forms out of the body and not allow a setup where the body ends up having to reabsorb the estrogen it just works so hard to get rid of, and then it starts the whole process over again. So this is where, however you get your fiber, right, or prebiotics, however you do that, go for it. Again, win for kale and all leafy green veggies to escort the estrogens out of the body, but do it and make sure that you're going every single day or whatever is normal for you in terms of bowel movement habits. That should be the goal for you, because that's how it will finish up safely getting estrogen escorted out of the body. So of course, for the most part, we love the conjunction of all these things, because if you help impact how much estrogen your brain is telling the ovaries to make, then usually the initial period where you're working really hard to get estrogen out of the body only lasts, a certain period of time, because once you stop making as much and being exposed to as much in your environment, then that process doesn't need to be happening quite as aggressively. So this is where we could continue to talk about if someone doesn't have a plan for you for getting off supplements, or for treating the root cause to eventually get off supplements, this is where we need to start asking questions for but what am I actually doing to get at the root cause, so that eventually I can withdraw the amount of support my body needs, right? So we always want to keep looping back around. This isn't just the usual runaround is you go in, you get a bunch of labs, you get some data, you go on supplements, and then that's kind of it until you go in again or go to another person. We did that for years and it sucked. We were done with it. We were like, we don't want to do this anymore. So that's what caused Megan and I to continue to ask, how can we actually dig deep enough and far enough into the physiology, understand what's happening at the root cause level and impact that, so that we can get off support and have our body work in the optimized way it should actually be working as younger people, anyone younger to really as anyone premenopausal to us. And then or young, is anyone premenopausal? And then that's where it starts. I know people are like, they hit 35 and they think they're older. So no, that does not count for us. That's not older. In terms of what your physiology is, that is all, you know, what I hope for my body is that it self-regulates so that I can drive that decision. Now, for, you know, certain people, for those of us, like for me, I've had long-standing endometriosis that did not get diagnosed, even though I was going to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor. Oh my God. And some of the ovarian damage that happened will not return no matter what I do in terms of support, right? There are certain things, just like with thyroid damage, some people can't get fully off thyroid, but that does not mean that my body cannot be optimized to the best of what I have available to me. And that's where, you know, I was told that I was going into menopause at 27. That was inevitable. There was no other options for me. You know, I could do a hysterectomy for the bleeding, but eventually, you know, I would just stop and that was it for me. And I was like, well, I don't want a hysterectomy in the meantime, and I don't really want to go into menopause, so what can I do? You know, and this is where Megan and I really were challenged as practitioners to continue to go deeper. And of course, you guys know my story. I'm not in menopause. I did recover function, but I also understand that I did not recover it to like the ovaries that the parts of my ovaries that were cut away in surgery did not grow back. I don't think that it's ever going to happen, but the tissue that I did have was able to be optimized, and that's the part that I think really bums me out, where what I was told was I'll never optimize that and there's no hope. And that really was heartbreaking to me. Whereas now I'm like, there are ways to optimize what's still there, understanding that I may need more support than the average lady. But hey, that's cool. That doesn't mean I have to be on a boatload. It just means I have my toolkit. For the most part, it's pretty slim. But when things kind of get wonky or things hit the fan, I know what toolkit to bring out. So there's no shame in the game if you're like, yeah, I don't really see how I'm going to get off all support ever. Well, you know what? Maybe you won't, but that doesn't mean that things can't be optimized in the meantime so that you actually feel good to the best of your capability. And if there's some support that you need long term, hey, like I said, I need it. That those ovaries, you know, aren't probably gonna go back for me, and that's cool. Again, that's where I started this entire conversation with, because it matters so much from the top down, this is my opportunity to approach myself with that love, gentleness, and compassion, and understand that I need what I need. I'm now the parent to my inner child. I'm going to commit to providing myself the support my body needs. And that's just a commitment I have made to myself. And that has really been transformative for me. All right, so I know that was a whole lot of information that you guys just got. That was probably like, your minds are exploding, but questions that you have, you feel free to type on in. If you're kind of listening along and you're like, oh my gosh, I just need someone to help me walk through this process. It seems like there's a lot of steps. There are. Seems like there's a lot of ways to go at it. That's true. If you're sitting there and feeling like you need help, that's what Megan and I are here for you. We have our Healthy Hormones group program that is open for registration right now. It is a 12-week program where Megan and I walk you step by step through how we take our ladies from kind of disempowered, dealing with a lot of hormone issues, to empowered. They know their exact numbers. They know what they're doing. They know how to interpret the results. They know their plan for supplements. They are building their own toolkit for the rest of their life, and they're setting up a situation where they are in control of their health space, their female health care, and they feel empowered to take control of their lives to become the females that they want to be and the humans that they want to be. So if you are interested in joining us, I'm going to drop the link here. We have We have registration open for for another week. We start Tuesday on the 21st. And we have multiple payment plans to start. If you are feeling like you're worried about finances, or you're worried that you're going to have an issue with those, please reach out to us. We have payment plans. We have ways of, like, for example, we can refer you for help where you can get zero interest payment plans and payment options. There are just a multitude of ways that we can help you make that decision and set it up so that it's not another stressor in your life. So please email us. It's support@zestyginger.com. If you're having issues, just reach out to us, because we want you to be able to get the help you need, but we also understand that finances and life gets in the way, and there's a lot of moving pieces. And obviously we've been working with a lot of women, so we've been doing this a while, so we are pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. Just reach out to us if you ever have questions. All right, so go to that link, zestyginger.com/healthy-hormones. There's a link right on there to join. And also, if you want to hop on a call with one of us or a team member to go through your particular situation and figure out if you'd be a good fit, fill out that questionnaire link. It's right when you open it. It's right there, a big purple button. You just click it, you fill out the questionnaire, and then at the end, you'll be able to schedule a call with us. All right, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for hopping on live. I super appreciate it, and I will talk to you soon.